Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Bennington with the Circle of Atonement, and I'm here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we are covering in our 6-part series on the 10 characteristics of the spiritually advanced. The 10 characteristics are from section 4 of the Manual for Teachers of A Course in Miracles. And so far in this series, we have covered trust, honesty, tolerance, gentleness, joy. And today we are going to cover defenselessness and generosity. If you haven't listened to any of the previous episodes in this series, don't worry, you will still be able to follow along. And just as a reminder, we are covering the 10 characteristics of the spiritually advanced because in the course, spiritual development is directly tied to goodness of character. As we've been saying throughout this series, it's part of spiritual growth to seek the heights of oneness and peak meditative states. But along the way, we should also not lose sight of the fact that character traits matter as well. Being good people matters, and the Course definitely has a lot to say about pointing us in the right direction.
Yeah,
so
we could
Robert,
say that the states are a means and the traits are the end.
Right. So, Robert, our first characteristic is defenselessness. And before we get into what the manual has to say about defenselessness, the idea of defense itself is a thread that runs throughout the course. So let's start there. What is the course's basic picture of defense?
Well, the basic picture, I think, is really simple. We feel like we are a weak and vulnerable self. We feel like we are in a world that poses us with many, many threats. And you put those two things together, and we have to defend ourselves constantly. And if we don't, we are in serious danger. We need to, be on the defense. And part of that defense means being on the attack. The Course talks about how it's a well-known fact. The world deals harshly with defenseless innocence. So if we're just innocent and defenseless, we are in trouble.
We're going to get run over.
We're going to get run over. Yeah.
Or so we think. I mean, we spend so much of our lives in a state of being defensive and seeking safety and attacking because we feel so weak and vulnerable. I mean, this just absolutely consumes us, doesn't it?
Totally. And the Course mentions a lot of the forms this takes, even though the list could be endless. So it talks about how we surround ourselves with, quote, complicated structures of defense. It talks about medicine repeatedly being one of these defenses. We're defending against ill health. It talks about how idols in our lives, like the people and the things that we think will save us, they are there to be our protectors, so that those valued people and those valued things almost like create a wall around us. So the harsh, dangerous world can't get to us because they're there. It says in the lesson, "In my defenselessness, my safety lies," it says, and it is this, meaning defending, you do when you attempt to plan the future, activate the past, or organize the present as you wish. So defense is active in relation to all three dimensions of time, where our plans for the future are really protections against future threats. Organizing the present is a way to keep ourselves protected. And activating the past, like bringing the past back to life in our mind, has a defensive quality. We're trying to defend against that ever happening to us again. So there's even a reference in Jesus talking to Helen about her husband, Louis, to Louis engaging in clearly some kind of magical thinking to keep himself feeling safe. Jesus said, actually, he does this, and this is a reference to Louis leaving things around the house in strange ways, like Helen was furious that he left his socks on the living room table. He does this, Jesus says, because he thinks that by minor areas of disorganization, like the socks and the table, he can protect his stability. So the sense you get is Louis thinks that by having this one little area of mess, socks on the table, he can almost like magically corral all the chaos and instability and disorganization in his life in those socks, and then he's safe.
If only it were that easy.
If
right?
only it were that easy, right? So, and then
we
finally,
don't have socks on the table.
yeah. I mean, Louis has literally done nothing practical to keep himself safer. Nothing. And in fact, he's made himself vulnerable to his wife's fury. Okay, and then finally, the Course says that our defense includes, quote, all the world's structures, its penalties and heavy armaments, its legal definitions and its codes, its ethics and its leaders and its gods. All of those things are structures of defense that we hope will keep us safe.
Yeah, so I think for most of us, it's really easy to see all the ways in which we put up defenses in life. I mean, this is a world that feels and often is very scary. And so for anyone who's listening, who's like, well, yeah, I plan for the future. And yeah, I actively think about the past so as to protect myself from repeating any kind of toxic patterns. And I do take medicine, and what's wrong with that? It actually, these things seem to work. What would you say to anyone who may be thinking that?
Well, I think we need to keep doing a certain amount of those things while we work on the real protection, which we'll get to later, which is a mental process. But as we more and more identify with the real protection, I think those physical protections, the need for them drops away more and more.
We're trying to keep our bodies safe.
Right.
Is that what we're defending?
Well, the Course talks about us protecting and defending our body in all kinds of ways, against disease, against time. It's an endless list of how we protect the body. But it also mentions a number of times how we protect our sense that we're special, our sense of specialness. There's 9 references that pair defense and specialness. And that, once you see that pattern, you think, oh my God, that is like practically a full-time occupation, is making sure no one insults or in any way, compromises our specialness.
And I think that's really good to point out because, again, it looks like a threatening world. And so often what we do to be defensive, we think is just protecting our body. But the Course is like, yeah, that's true. But there's this other thing that you're protecting too, and it's your specialness. And you really need to take a look at that.
Right. There's a great phrase somewhere in the Course in chapter 16 that talks about our wounded self-esteem. And that's obviously connected. It's like we have this image of ourselves where we have these abilities and these victories and achievements. And we need people to acknowledge and respect those, or we're going to get defensive.
Yeah, you were saying earlier that the Course pairs defensiveness and specialness 9 times.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. And it's almost all in one chapter on specialness. So he's got it clearly in mind that we're a bunch of prickly people who make sure that our specialness, our honor, our self-esteem is not in any way slighted.
And that I think we see all the time once we sort of put on our decoder glasses for it. We see how much of our defensiveness and how much of the defensiveness we see in others is tied to the ego. And as you start to peel back the layers on why and how we're so defensive, you can see that we're defensive because we think that it makes us appear strong, we think that being defensive is going to be the thing that removes our fear, but it actually increases our fear because being defensive affirms our weakness. So we feel defensive, we're defensive because we're feeling weak, and that feeling of weakness only makes us more afraid. And so what we need to recognize is that it's being defensive itself that we need to protect against.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what one point the course makes, I don't think we normally even consider, is maybe we aren't so weak and vulnerable. Maybe we can't be hurt. And we'll get to that a bit more later, but if that's the case, then defenses, which clearly imply and affirm that we're super vulnerable, they make us vulnerable in our own minds. They constantly tell us we should be afraid because we can be hurt. And so the course is saying defenses are what weaken us rather than what protect us.
And that's a complete reframe
Totally.
on defensiveness, because we only get defensive because we feel like it's going to protect us. We're trying to, this is what anger is in part, we're trying to use our anger to control a situation and get it in alignment with what it is that we want. And we think that is a position of strength. And anyone who's been on the receiving end of that kind of anger knows that, yeah, maybe you win in the short term, maybe, but you never win in the long term. It actually is a weak position. You look weak when you use anger to get what you want.
Yeah, we all have seen people in our lives or public figures who, think the best defense is a good offense, and everyone talks about them as insecure.
When you're the one being defensive, you feel like you have to do it. And maybe in some ways it feels like strength, but in your mind, somewhere in your mind, you're doing it from a position of weakness. So we think it's strength within ourselves, oftentimes, even though we know better. But when we see it in other people, it looks so weak. And yet
Yeah.
we still do it ourselves. So we're so confused on this issue.
Yeah, yeah, it's really true. I mean, what the course offers us is a way to look at it in a completely new light where, hey, maybe rather than my defenses keeping me safe, they just affirm how weak and vulnerable I am and therefore make me feel constantly unsafe. Like that's a new thought for us.
Yeah. And also a new thought is, if we take the course at its word and we say, okay, I know I'm trying to defend my body and I know I'm trying to defend my sense of specialness. Like, what if we just said, I am not this self, and I don't have to protect my specialness because the specialness is tied to this self that I'm not. And then we can just drop the defensiveness because we know who we really are.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where the course is leading us. But something I think we should mention along the way is it seems like we just think we are this weak, vulnerable self. It's a weak, vulnerable body, a weak, vulnerable image that we hope people will see as special. Um, it just looks like we think we're that. And so we're going to keep it safe. But the course says there's a whole other layer going on that we are completely unaware of. The other layer is somewhere in our heart, we realize that self is an illusion. And we are afraid of it being exposed to us as an illusion. We're afraid we'll realize it's an illusion. And so the real purpose of our defenses is to shore up that illusion, to say, I am that special self. I am that body. I really, really, really am. And so the main thing underneath it all we're trying to defend against is the realization that that's not who we are.
Oh, that's good. Because then you get into that whole idea of we're afraid of our spiritual selves because we're so stuck in these bodies. We're so identified with these bodies that we think if we lose the body, then we'll be eviscerated. And so we defend the body because we think this is who we really are.
And we're really trying to reinforce that in our mind. Our defense, we think, is just there to protect the body. Underneath it is there to protect our belief that that really is us.
And it's special.
And it's special, right? Right. I mean, the problem with being the body and being the special person we think we are, is those are both, they're kind of on the public field where anything can kick them around. Anything can kick our body around. Anything can kick our image around and say, no, we aren't special. And it's just overwhelming to try to defend against all that.
So then real strength would be realizing that you're not your body, you're not your specialness. And so therefore you don't have to defend those things.
Right. And that's what the Course says again and again. That's why we have that lesson 153, in my defenselessness, my safety lies. The notion is that you will only feel truly secure when you realize that you are a self that God created. And by nature, by the manner of your creation, you can't be hurt. I wanted to read a couple of passages from lesson 153 about this. It says, defenselessness is strength. It testifies to recognition of the Christ in you. Defenselessness can never be attacked because it recognizes strength so great, attack is folly. And then later in the same lesson, it says, we look past dreams today and recognize that we need no defense because we were created unassailable. So that's why the Course says that in our defenselessness, our safety lies, because defenselessness is not like, yeah, I'm vulnerable, run me over, and because I want to be holy, I will let you. Defenselessness says, God created me unassailable. And if I identify with that self, not the body, not the specialness, then I will feel a security that I don't have to protect. It's not about how good I am at making sure the alarm system's armed and all that. It's about God at the very beginning created me unassailable. And so I'm forever safe.
But don't you need both though? You need to know who you really are, and you also need to lock your door at night.
Well, I think for now, I think when we really know who we are, then we can do things that for, the rest of us would be really unsafe. And I think of a few examples. One of my examples, of course, is Peace Pilgrim, where
we're not getting through a podcast without an NDE or a Peace Pilgrim story.
Well, it's kind of applicable here. I know that, but it's kind of applicable because she was this old woman who wandered the streets for 30 years. And then the other example that comes to my mind, I was just reading today an excerpt from Les Miserables, the book, and the sort of the early hero of the story is this guy, the bishop, and he's known as Bishop Welcome because he does not have a lock on his door. Everyone's welcome. And when any old traveler, maybe even a dangerous traveler like Jean Valjean, comes in, the bishop says, this place is more your place than mine. I own nothing that's here. So he was exposing himself to apparent danger. And then, of course, the best example is Jesus. He didn't defend himself while being, tried and executed.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I think Jesus is the ultimate example of defenselessness, going right to your death with love and forgiveness. And yet, I also think that we should just be very honest about where we are. And we're not at Jesus's level yet, although we're headed on that track. And so we need to recognize that we are not these bodies, we're not this specialness. And so if that's the source of our defensiveness, then disidentifying with those things would cause us to be more defenseless. And I don't think you have to be Peace Pilgrim to do that, or Jesus to do that. But I do think that if you hold them up as examples, then once again, you'll get further than you would have gone otherwise. So I want to be responsible in the message that we're giving, because this is a world where people do take advantage of other people. And at the same time, when you are truly in this headspace like Jesus was in, there's real spiritual power in it. And I don't want to discount that power, but I also want to say we're not there yet. And
well, yeah, we need to be honest about where we're at, rather than like throwing our pills away to show how spiritual
right.
we
Like,
are.
I don't want anybody to do anything stupid because they heard this podcast. And so I just think it's a balance.
Yeah. I think what the Course would say is the real solution to your sense of being insecure and unsafe is identifying with the fact that you were created unassailable. And as you do that, you can start laying down those defenses until you've laid them all down.
Yeah, so that's where our real safety lies, is in the process of laying down those defenses. So that lesson that you keep quoting, in my defenselessness, my safety lies, if we really took that in and laid down our defenses, then it would be replaced with safety and love and joy. Like we can touch those things because we're not clinging so much to our body and our sense of specialness.
Yeah, one of the things that's really interesting it's only a one paragraph discussion of defenselessness in the manual. I mean, it's mentioned throughout the course, but the manual is only one paragraph. And it says, I think the line is, God's teachers have learned how to be simple. And that's what we can look forward to. Like, we do surround ourselves with complicated structures of defense right now, defending ourselves in all kinds of ways, our body, our image, the whole thing. As we identify with our real nature, which is invulnerable, can't be attacked, we will, I think, more and more drop those complicated structures, and our lives will get simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love one of your stories that I love is the guru, I guess, who kept saying, "Is that so?" So no matter what happened in his life, he would just say, "Is that so?" I know I've shared this before. We've talked about this before, but like someone comes and says, "This is your baby," and he's like, "Is that so?" And then they come and they say, "Well, I'm taking the baby away." It's like, "Is that so?" And as you're saying, I mean, there's a real like simplicity in that. You're not waking up each morning trying to figure out how to defend your body and your specialness. You're just kind of taking things as they come, letting them go as they go. And there is a real like simplicity in that we don't value enough. We don't value the simplicity, we value the specialness. We don't value the truth, we value the specialness.
Yeah. And how much of our defense is unnecessary? Like, I mean, how much of our defense is the equivalent of Louis with the socks? There's a great story that they would tell about the early years of the Finhorn spiritual community in Scotland. And basically, Peter and Eileen Caddy were being supported by money from the government because they didn't have a normal job, and just building this community, and they're out in the garden. And so eventually a guy from the government comes and says to Peter, "Well, so what you're saying is that you're not working because and I may not have the story exactly right, but you're not working because you're just trusting in God. He's just going to supply. And Peter's like, yep. And the guy says, so if the government took away your money, then presumably God would take care of you. And Peter's like, I guess so. And so the government took away the money. And right at that time, they had published their very first book of guidance through that Eileen had been receiving from God. And now they were supported by that.
Mm.
So you wonder how much of the defense we need.
Yeah, and those stories abound. We have them here at the Circle. Just when we needed the money to print the CE, all of a sudden it showed up in ways that sum of money has never shown up before or since. And so, yeah, I just feel like if we got one thing from this part of the manual on defenselessness, it's that being defensive actually makes you look weak. You think it makes you look
feel
strong.
weak. Makes you feel weak. Yeah.
Well, it makes you, it makes you feel and look weak. And so why are we so defensive? So you look underneath why we're so defensive, and it's because we're trying to protect the body, trying to protect our specialness. And if we just, again, disidentify with those things, then we won't feel the need to be so defensive. We can be defenseless, and that's real strength from a course perspective.
Yeah. The ultimate solution is to identify with the truth in us, to realize God created us in such a way that we're like Superman. We can't be hurt.
Our bodies can be, but our true identity can't be.
Right.
So,
and if we know that, our bodies get more invulnerable too.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, look at Jesus. His body was destroyed, and then a couple of days later, bam, he's appearing bodily places. Or Peace Pilgrim, she said she devoted herself completely to her mission and she never had another ache or pain again. Like you would think walking the roads with no protection from weather to speak of, you'd be landing in the hospital all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hers is such an interesting story. I know I like to pick on you, but yeah, she was something. Okay. So let's move on to generosity. So often in these 10 characteristics, they are like running themes in the course. Trust is a running theme. Defenselessness is a running theme. But the only time the word generosity appears in the course is here in this section of the manual. It doesn't appear anywhere else. So given that it's not a running theme, why do you think generosity is one of the 10 traits of the spiritually advanced?
Well, that's a good question. And there's a really simple answer to it. One of the course's central themes is the importance of giving and how giving is not loss, but is receiving. And generosity is basically just the trait of being giving. It's the character trait of being giving. So if we're talking about character traits, someone who's living out the course's value system, that person's going to give so much that generosity is one of their traits.
Yeah, and generosity is a word that obviously we're all very familiar with, and we know that being a good person means being a generous person. We know that generosity is a form of egolessness, and yet we aren't as generous as we could or should be, because we do have an association in our mind that if we give, we'll lose. So what we give, we lose. And the course just has a completely different perspective on that.
Yeah, I think what we should not underestimate how much the thought that giving means loss rules our minds and our lives and holds us back from giving. I remember being in a class one time, like 20 years ago, and there was a woman there who was like, yeah, I get that. Giving is for saying, I totally get that. Well, if you totally got that, your efforts at receiving would all take the form of giving. Like we would all know if you got that. And it's kind of obvious why we think that giving means loss. If you give your money away, that money is no longer yours. If you give of your time, you've lost that time. If you give of your energy, you don't have that energy. You feel depleted. You've got to rest and restore yourself. When you give something to someone else, it's not yours anymore. You have apparently lost it. So this is no mystery why we associate giving with loss.
But the Course says that to give and receive are one in truth. And I guess it's that in truth piece that we need to latch onto, because when you say giving and receiving are one on earth, all those examples that you just said pop up. It's like, well, if I give away my money, I kind of don't have it anymore. But as a spiritual principle, to give and receive are one in truth, that what we give to other people, we receive ourselves.
Yeah. And I think this takes, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but it takes some very, concrete forms. It's not that mysterious. In fact, this is a bit of folk wisdom that giving is receiving. You can find all over the place. But the reason you can find it everywhere is that we need to hear it. Everyone carries the sense of, I will lose if I give.
Well, yeah, we need to hear it because we so identify with loss, with losing as we give. Yeah, I think we, in general, I think there's a sense of us that we know we like to give. We know that, again, giving is a good person. And yet it's that little thing in the back of our mind that's like, if I give, I'm going to lose. That just holds us back from being as generous as we could be. And the Course is just asking us to get rid of that little voice that says you're going to lose. And that's, well, I'll let you finish, but I think that's where trust comes into. We can talk about that in a minute.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to say about this idea. I mean, the Course repeats the phrase giving and receiving are the same, that exact phrase 6 times. That's an unusual amount of repetition for the Course with a, phrase that long. There's a lot to say about this. One of the things to say is that the idea that giving and receiving are the same is one of the central teachings in A Course in Miracles. I feel like it's kind of, back in the early days with Jerry Jampolsky's Love is Letting Go of Fear and Attitudinal Healing and all that, I think that was more in the air. But I think nowadays we've gotten so focused on it's all in your mind, right? That giving, which is an interpersonal thing, takes place beyond your mind and your behavior towards others. I feel like it's somewhat drifted to the margins. But if you look at things that the Course says about giving, it's astonishing, the emphasis it receives. So I collected a few passages, I think like 4 passages, one of them from the generosity discussion in the manual. And putting them side by side, I saw that there were 3 big themes that repeated in those passages. Okay, and I just wanted to mention those. One is this idea that giving and receiving are the same is stated and emphasized throughout the Course. So a couple of quotes here. Emphasized throughout the text and workbook, the manual says that, said 100 ways, 100 times, the workbook says that. Number 2, this idea that giving is receiving is extremely important to the Course's goals. A couple more quotes. It's a major learning goal this Course has set. It's, quote, crucial to the thought reversal which this Course would bring about. Then number 3, this idea is unusually or completely alien to the thinking of the world. A couple more quotes. Perhaps more alien to the thinking of the world than many other ideas in our curriculum. And then again, completely alien to the ego and the thinking of the world. Almost the same quote there. So Jesus is seeing this idea as this massively repeated, massively important, and massively alien theme that really goes to the heart of A Course in Miracles.
So much of the course is just trying to get us to take how we associate a concept and just flip it upside down, where we think that if we're generous, we're going to lose. And he's trying to teach us, no, actually, it's in your generosity that you gain. And so
Yeah.
the thinking of the fact that this idea is alien to the thinking of the world is not surprising, because so much of what the course is trying to teach us is alien to the world. And this is where I'm also wondering if these two ideas are connected, because if you aren't identified with your body and if you aren't identified with your specialness, then could you be more generous as a result? Like, without the walls of the protection of the body and the specialness, could the generosity just flow through you? And
I think
so
absolutely. I mean, one of our big defenses is hoarding, right? If we hoard that stuff, we will be able to meet whatever threat comes at us from the world.
yeah, and I think we're going to get to this, but that idea in the manual under generosity is that why would you keep things of the world? Why would you keep anything of the world? It doesn't serve you. And what you can be giving is the things of God. But I think we're going to get to that. But anyway, this is where, as I was saying before, trust comes in, because you just have to kind of believe him when he says that to give and to receive are one in truth. And so we just have to lean on his thinking that if we give, we won't lose. And he even says it somewhere in the workbook, like, test him on this. I think it's actually in that lesson, to give and receive are one in truth. It's like, test it and you'll see that this idea is true. But until we believe that it's true, we have to trust that he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, I think we have to trust to the degree that we try it, and then presumably our experience will bear out the principle, and then on the strength of that we can go further. But yeah, I mean, we have to the trust that I think he's talking about. In this section, he says, like all the other attributes, this one rests on trust. For without trust, no one can be generous in the true sense. He's talking about not so much trust in him, but like trust in the principle that giving is not loss, but is receiving. It's like, unless you trust that principle, you're not going to give. It's just too risky. I want to bring something up, though, about that. And
Do
that
you?
is that I
Peace
do.
Pilgrim, sorry.
Very funny. That is something really important, he says, in this discussion of generosity in the manual, is that the course gives the term a new meaning, because the old meaning is you give things, and then what's unstated is, but implied and understood is, and you lose them. Mm-hmm. And this new meaning is you give things and you keep them, even though you've given them away. You gain from giving. And what he says is that special meaning is something we have to learn, and learn, quote, very carefully. So when we hear the word, we need to be training our minds to think, okay, it's not giving and then we lose, it's giving and then we keep and we gain, so that we have a new association with the word. And I feel like until we have a new association with generosity, with the word giving, then we're going to be in the same trap where we're holding back out of fear of loss.
Yeah, and this is an area where even the research is saying the same thing that the course is saying. So when you get into what makes us happy, for example, when I was a mindful leadership coach, I used to always cite the study about our happiness set point, where we basically all have this point of our own happiness, and we can become happier by falling in love, getting a job, winning the lottery, etc. But when the sparkle of those things wears off, we bounce back to our set point, and we can become less happy. We can become more depressed by losing the job, losing the love, losing the money, etc. But eventually we get over it and we come back to that original happiness set point. But what the research showed was that there is one thing that elevates our level of happiness and holds it in that higher place, and that is altruism. It's giving to something or a cause or a person, something bigger than yourself. Giving to something bigger than yourself, I think, is the best way to put it. And so the course is saying that giving makes us happy in the truest sense. The research is saying that giving makes us happy, and yet we still personally associate giving with loss. I mean, that's just like a deeply rooted belief in us.
It's deeply rooted. I was listening to the podcast called The Happiness Lab today, and their latest episode from the end of November was about this very topic. And so Laurie Santos, the host, she was interviewing a researcher who's done tons of research on the connection between giving and happiness. She's researched the connection between giving your time and happiness. She's researched the connection between giving your money and happiness. And what she says is, if you ask people, if you give them a amount of money and you ask them what they'll get more happiness from, spending it on themselves or on somebody else, she says practically everybody will say on themselves. And this kind of ties right into Laurie Santos's refrain that you hear a lot in her podcast, that your brain lies to you about what's going to make you happy. What it tells you is false. And so the research shows that when you actually take that money and give it to somebody else, you get a bigger happiness hit than when you spend it on yourself, in spite of your complete expectation. And there's she's done all kinds of detailed research into this, as have many others. But the point is that we tell ourselves that lavishing money, time, etc., energy on ourselves will do the trick, and then we aren't so happy, when in fact the research suggests the happy people are the ones who give their time, give their money, etc., to others. And this research was not being done when the course was being dictated back in the 60s and 70s. This is much more recent. So he knew how we actually work.
You mentioned that Laurie, like a refrain that Laurie says in her podcast, is the brain lies to you. And I think it's just like, in course parlance, it's just the ego lies to you. And your ego is going to tell you that it's the specialness and it's the things that are going to make you happy. And we believe it. And we believe it even though we know when we get those things, we're just as unhappy as we were before. Going back to that, like, happiness set point, yeah, we might have an elevated sense of happiness for a little bit, but eventually it wears off and we bounce right back. And so it is interesting, though, that the research is catching up to what the course has said to be true. And so, like,
decades ago.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. So in the manual, it says that what we're giving to other people is the things of God. So we're giving love. I guess if you could distill God to this purest form, it would be love. So we're giving God's love to others, but we're giving it in visible form. So I know we've talked about giving away, like, physical things, giving away money and that kind of thing, but really what we're talking about in terms of generosity as a spiritual virtue is we're giving love to other people. Is that right?
Yeah, but we're giving love in tangible forms. You know, if all you ever do to give love to people is just say something, I mean, that can be a very powerful way to give love to people. But if you never back it up with actions where you devote your time to them and your energy and your money, then they're not going to feel as loved. So the Course has this formula, and it does go to the heart of the Course. It's a Course in Miracles. The main definition of miracle in the Course is an expression of love. Well, expression is a behavioral expression, right? It's something you do. Love is meant to be the feeling, the thought behind that outward expression. So, at the very foundation of A Course in Miracles is this notion of giving love in some kind of tangible, visible form. And so that would include everything. It means all kinds of examples of miracles in Helen and Bill's lives, things that Jesus called miracles. They took tangible forms. There's a place in the Course that talks about giving away a quote finite thing in it that is a certain form that your body's eyes see. He's talking about giving away a possession like an object. So we should think, yeah, what you're really giving inside the outer thing is love, but it's love clothed in some visible behavioral form.
And that's an interesting point to make, because when you think of miracles as expressions of love, then we just think that means sending someone our love. You can do that telepathically. You can just tell them how much you love them. But the emphasis that you're putting on this is, no, you show them through actual physical expressions, as well as your nonverbal and verbal expressions of love.
Yeah, I mean, verbal expressions, that's one of the main categories. If you look at the things that Jesus called miracles that happened in Helen and Bill's lives, a lot of them were just something that was said, but it wasn't limited to that. I mean, we know if we're really feeling love towards somebody and trying to express that in the most helpful form that's helpful to them, we're going to find ourselves expressing our love in a million different forms, aren't we?
Yeah, and one thing that's coming up for me as you're talking is the recent angel auction that we did here at the Circle. And we had all of these physical items that were up for auction, and people could bid on them, and the proceeds went to the app. And the criticism of that auction was, you're a organization dedicated to spiritual principles of A Course in Miracles. Why are you putting so much focus on physical things? And for a minute there, I was like, gosh, well, yeah, maybe that's a good point. And then at the end of it, we raised our goal. And in the process, there was a lot of love and cooperation and harmony and joy that came with it. People were genuinely excited about the things that they bid on and that they received. And all in all, it was a really cool experience together with us as the team and us as a community. And so, yeah, it was physical things, but at the end of the day, it was so much more than that. And I think that that's an example of what you're talking about here.
Yeah. And yeah, well, it's a great example. It reminds me that one of the very early discussions about how giving is not lost, but is receiving is in the beginning of chapter 5 in the text. And he basically says there, well, you know that when you give an idea away, you don't lose, the idea grows stronger in you, especially if the other person accepts the idea as their own. He says, well, everything is an idea. It means even physical things are ideas. So if physical things are really ideas and you give them away, then the idea in you grows stronger. And then it takes a form that reflects that stronger idea. So he's really clear that this includes giving physical stuff.
As we're giving things in God, in true generosity, we're also protecting them forever in ourselves or for ourselves. So the Course is very clear that when we give to others, it comes back to us. This section of the manual even says that we give out of self-interest. So how does our giving come back to us?
Yeah. Well, in the research that we've been talking about, it's clear that it comes back to us in an emotional form. Like we just feel great. We feel better giving the money to somebody else than spending it on ourselves. We don't think we will, but we do. So there's just the emotional way it comes back to us. And I think the course would link that to it reveals the underlying eternal goodness in us that we are in heavy doubt about, right? We feel like we're sinners. We feel like we're not truly good. When we give, it shows that, hey, maybe there is a goodness in us that's just innate and natural. So the emotional level is the first one. But the course talks about a couple other levels here in which it comes back to us. One is interpersonally. Basic to the course's system is that we give miracles, expressions of love to others, and that affects them. That heals their minds because love does that. And then they return that to us in the form of gratitude. And their gratitude is an expression of love. And in their gratitude, they are delivering to us a vision of us in which the course says they see in you more than you see. So they see a value in you. They see a light in you that you probably don't see because they are the ones who've been on the receiving end of it. And that gratitude, the course is saying, saves us in a way we cannot save ourselves. And the course is really overt about that. So our gifts set in motion our saviors, who are our brothers, and then through them giving to us in return, they save us. That's a huge, huge benefit that comes from giving. And then the last benefit, which is not emphasized in the course, but it's there, is that things even return to us physically. And there's a really clear discussion of this, which almost strikes me as like something from in the prosperity gospel or something, but it's in lesson 187. I bless the world because I bless myself. And what it says is that when you give a finite thing, a physical thing away, your body's eyes don't see it as being yours anymore. But then it says we've learned that physical things represent a thought. And when we give away a thought, it grows in strength. So we've given the finite thing, it's not ours anymore, but the thought that it represented is now stronger in us. And then what that lesson says is, therefore, that thought will take a new form in our lives. Okay. A new thing will show up to replace the old thing. And that new form will actually be more acceptable to us. Why? Because the thought it represents has grown stronger through the act of giving. So this is really saying that, we give stuff away and we actually get something back to replace it. And what we get back is better.
If we're saying we're generous out of self-interest and we have some kind of feeling like, well, that's not right, then we still have some connection with generosity as being loss. But if you are thinking, I'll be generous out of self-interest because to give and receive are one in truth. So what I give, I gain, and what I give, I protect for myself, then we're all in this together. Robert, I think I just got that. I'm having like a little Oprah moment, when sometimes when she's like, oh, I just got that, like in the middle of her interview.
I've
Well,
never watched Oprah.
I just had like a little Oprah moment there.
Okay.
So
yeah,
I
it's a
hope
big
everyone
deal.
had that with me.
There's a great line towards the end of the Gifts of God, the scribing that we talk a lot about at the back of the poetry collection, where he says, a gift is holy only when there is no thought of who will gain thereby and not a shadow of a thought of loss. So a gift is holy when the thought is we gain. Another way to say that is I'm saying in my mind, in your gain, I gain too. And that's a holy thought.
We have a new definition of generosity to learn, don't we?
We do. And I think that's the key to unlocking our generosity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Robert, I wish we had more time. We were already past the hour, but
Oh my
this
gosh.
this has been a good discussion, and appreciate it. And I hope that all of you listening gained from it as much as I did. Next week, we will be covering patience and faithfulness as we continue our journey through the 10 characteristics of God's teachers. And we'll see you then. Bye for now.